Hey, what's up, y'all?
I like your new intro.
Okay.
Kind
Yeah,
of
you inspire me.
kind of fancy.
Nah, man, you over there, you got it going on, brother. You inspire me. I was like, man, Omowale making me step my game up.
True.
Black Power Media is making all of us.
No. I've seen your promos. We don't have promos like that. We don't
try
have promos like
cut it out, cut it out, cut it out. Y'all doing amazing work over there.
Yeah, y'all are. Y'all be up too early for me, but y'all doing it.
I mean, y'all got a morning show and y'all making old Roland Martin feel threatened.
Hey, man, I saw that.
I don't understand why the old man coming for us. Why
Yeah.
he coming for us?
Exactly.
He got his numbers. What do you need from us? I think he's a little scared there.
Yeah, he feel.
Oh,
he feel
man.
We got to have each of y'all on though. If that's not happened already, we got to make sure we have that happen.
Just let me know.
Yeah, I would love.
I know both of y'all are willing to fight. I've seen some of y'all online, so I know. Obviously, I've witnessed it myself. So yeah,
Absolutely,
so, yeah,
absolutely.
we gotta have y'all on. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would love to come on, and I'll get up early for that one. I'm not a morning person, but I'll get up early for that. So tonight we're doing part 2 of commercialization of the movement. That first one was really, really good. I forgot what the inspiration was for that one.
It was Cadillac.
It was who?
Cadillac.
Oh yeah, it was Old Girl in Cadillac. Right. Thank you. I should have went back and revisited that. But anyway, I want to welcome my audience. Y'all come on in. Hit the thumbs up button when y'all come in. Make sure y'all share this. I actually got 2 of my favorite people with me tonight, and they're going to be teaching, and I'm just going to be the student here. But my favorite Kamau and Omowale. I think my audience knows y'all. So I appreciate both of you and what both of you all bring to this space. I appreciate the work that both of you do individually. Kamau, you are doing amazing work with community movement builders down in Atlanta. And I still got to connect with you when I come to Atlanta. I was just in Atlanta last week, but it was a real quick turnaround trip. I was just there overnight and came right back home. So we definitely, next time I'm in Atlanta, we definitely got to connect. And of course, Omowale is doing his thing up in Philly. So we're here tonight for part 2, and I'm going to set it up actually from Omowale's tweet. This was earlier this month, and I think all 3 of us had a similar reaction to Kimberly Crenshaw's tweet about this new partnership that she and a bunch of other gatekeepers have with, let me just go back and see. It's called the Master Class. And I forget which station, I guess this is partnered with. She didn't mention. And I mean, let's just be real. Like, I don't have a problem with Black love. Like, I'm all for Black love. I'll read and read her quote from the tweet that she shared. This was on December 2nd. And so she says, Black love is the force that makes you believe in American democracy.
Yeah.
Even when American democracy hasn't believed in us. I'm working with 6 other Black scholars to help you see how the power of Black love offers hope for the future. Okay. So Omowale, this was your quote to the tweet. You said, one thing that remains consistent on the modern plantation / representation economy is that the Black elite eats good when they get a Democrat in the White House, while the Black masses get ignored and have their pain and protest co-opted by these bloodsuckers for profit. You went in, bro.
I didn't even know I probably, you know what it was? I think I woke up and that was probably the first thing that I saw, and it probably just upset my spirit, like when I seen it. You know what I mean? I wasn't trying to go in, because I don't even be on Twitter like that. I think I tweeted it and I turned off Twitter and I came back and I just realized it was getting retweeted by everybody.
Yeah, it did go a little viral. Kamau, he go viral like every day. He just posts something. He don't be tagging nobody or nothing, and people just be rocking with it. But I know you had something interesting to say about that too, Brother Kamau. What were your when you saw that share
I think,
what you thought.
similarly, I think there are even some of the folks on that program are excellent academics in the sense of they can recite Black history, the torture that we suffered in terms of being here in America, and the resistance that we've offered. But I also think because these people are so smart that they know better.
Right.
And so, when you're mixing themes that are meant to be not only beneficial to your pocketbook, but also that are meant to create a narrative that we as Black folks need to continue to support / believe in American democracy, and that American democracy has some relevance in terms of our liberation struggle. And so I think my reaction to it was, I don't want to, shit on somebody's work, but Black love has got nothing to do with American democracy. It is Black resistance that is all about Black love, right? And we need to think about how we've resisted here in the United States and internationally against this system. And that's the way to find so-called justice, liberation, freedom. It is not in sort of acting as if somehow our work here is to make America better, right? America is a failed country. It is an enslaving country. It is a habitual abuser country. We should not be thinking of ourselves as being tied to it in order for us to have liberation or us to have freedom. And I think that was similarly to Omowale. I think when I saw it, I was just sort of taken aback, kind of like, so my quick reaction was like, oh, hell no, what is this about, kind of thing. So
yeah. I mean, and the reason why, because I don't let Republicans off the hook at all. I just understand, like, the way this political economy works, right? The way that the representation economy works. You have the donor class of the Democratic Party. You have the entertainers, the different mainstream media outlets. And I think that they've gotten into this kind of like bait and switch game, right? Whenever there is a Democrat in the White House, and we know that Black people are overrepresented at the polls in terms of putting our support behind the Democratic Party. So they have to show visually that Black people are doing well. So we get all types of specials. We get Charlemagne the God on late night TV. People are getting all types of network deals. You get the founder of the Me Too movement getting deals with Levi's. You know what I mean? So you get all these things that are meant to symbolize kind of like Black progress, but Black people still suffer, right? The masses of people who turn out to the polls, the masses of people who are gaslit and coerced to give away their vote without anything in exchange. And when we talk about the real issues that the Black community is facing, I mean, there's no leadership at that level, right? Mainstream leadership presently that is useful to Black people, right? When we talk about the impending technological unemployment that's going to be driven by automation and the way that's going to hit Black people, when we talk about Black people being displaced right by the capitalist market trends that are moving us out our communities via gentrification, we talk about just food insecurity, like all these things that are kind of like landing on Black people's laps, and we get HBO specials about Black love and democracy. So it's like when I see it, like it really it makes me sick to my stomach. But what also enrages me is the cowardice of people who have platforms and voices and just go along to get along. They hitch their cart to the Democratic Party plantation and just say whatever messaging they've been told to say. And I feel like the 2020 election in Black America really exposed a fault line and exposed a lot of people for the cowards that they are. So at this point, I'm just beyond frustrated. So that's my perspective.
And if I get one quick addition to the
Please.
Other thing about that particular moment in terms of this master class was that it was behind a paywall. So all this conversation about teaching history, making sure that people have an understanding of our role and what, as they've seen it in terms of improving American democracy, all that knowledge and history, again, as they see it, can be yours for $9.99 or whatever the price is. So again, to me, it's a doubling down of the fact that these people are already well paid. They've already made good livings, right? They're already making good livings, right? And I'm not even trying to begrudge them on a certain level for that. But what I am saying to them is, don't use our history of resistance to put yourself in a better place financially, because there's a real struggle that's happening in the world. And if you are a so-called historian who is involved in talking about Black resistance or talking about the history of Black struggle here in America, and the best you can do in terms of providing that information, beyond the fact that you're getting a paycheck, is to now start charging people and charging a Black audience, because that's who that was geared towards, more resources that you can divide up amongst yourself. I see a problem with that aesthetic, that analysis, that idea that this is somehow now a money-making profit system for this is what resistance means to you. Resistance is now not about resistance. It's not about overcoming the issues and concerns that we have as a people. It's a profit-making motive and industry even, which again, when we talk about the movement, Black movement, that there's a section of Black movement that is clearly sided with capitalist democratic interest in terms of everybody getting a slice of the pie, including the Democrats getting a vote out of it, which keeps them going, which keeps other people being fed. So this cyclical interest happens. And as Brother Omowale stated, as the masses stay in their same positioning, the same downtrodden, the same poor, the same oppressed positioning, because none of these folks are really organizing, right? No one's going into the hood and trying to do organizing with everyday people, working class people. That is almost something that most folks do not do. They'd rather talk to the politicians, they'd rather talk to celebrities, they'd rather talk to be on magazine covers and articles. They'd rather do all of that than actually base themselves in Black communities and do work with Black people. And so that stood out to me also as this thing. And really quick, because I agree with I don't really even talk a lot about Republicans anymore, because I already understand.
I don't either.
Yeah, who they are vis-a-vis. And I think the larger Black community already has that understanding of who they are vis-a-vis us. They are overtly white supremacists who would chop us down, put us back in slavery, keep us poor and impoverished, keep us the workers of their society as long as they can. It is the Democrats and their liberal allies who are fighting actually for the Black masses, as we believe we are, as either left, nationalists, radicals, revolutionaries. We are fighting around the same constituency, trying to move the same people in a certain direction. So a lot of times my commentary these days is on that liberal class or that section of the so-called movement, because I think that what they're doing to the masses, to Black people, or what they're providing for larger liberal media, corporate media, is, as you stated earlier, the gatekeepers who try to say they know what Black people on the ground are thinking, involve them, give them consultancies, have them at the table, and they will represent the interests of Black people and what Black people want out of so-called policy changes, which of course the Democrats never deliver anyway, but claim to deliver for the Black vote.
Absolutely. I agree with that 1,000%.
Yeah, 1,000. But one of the things that stands out to me, kind of in connection with what you said, is that not only do the Black masses, not get anything, there are certain elements within that bourgeois class that are actually antagonistic towards the Black masses, especially the poor. And the poor Black men. I would even go further to say one of the things that I observed, Kamau, the last time I was in, not the last time I was in Atlanta, but the time before that, was the homelessness was off the chain. Like coming out of downtown and all those overpasses, I was just like, it's a whole tent city right here. And most of them, the vast majority of them were brothers. And I'm like, wait, this is the what they call Atlanta, the Black Mecca.
Black Mecca.
Yeah.
Yeah. What the fuck? I mean, you know what I mean? And it's just like, how is this okay with all of this Black leadership, elected leadership, right? And with all of these Black folks that got all this money. And then they got big churches, mega churches down there, and all these brothers out here homeless.
Well, it's we can get into this discussion too to a point. The idea, I think, because I think you're hitting on a couple of themes. One, like you said, that the bourgeois black leadership doesn't care at all about the black masses. In fact, at this particular stage, the black masses are an impediment to what they see as their own career choices and needs, right? And what I mean by that is that you have this liberal elected black leadership in Atlanta that's been in charge of Atlanta for now well over 50 years. And during that time period, we've had massive gentrification in Atlanta, where there's only a few black, poor, and working class neighborhoods left. You've had the Atlanta black population go from nearly 60% to under 50% under that leadership. You have still the same similar inability for any social movement, societal movement upwards for black people, right? And then at the same time, in terms of movement circles, you have this idea now that black men are the quote unquote oppressors, right? Which I think is a liberal idea. It's not to say that I don't think that there's patriarchy, of course, within the black community. It's not that I don't think that there are cultural institutions that black men are in charge of that actually do disservice to the larger black community. And it's not that I don't think that there are issues of violence, obviously, that are committed within our community around domestic violence and so forth, that black men have to take responsibility for. But to be clear, black men do not have any control.
I wanna like come in on that really quickly, because I gotta channel our brother Dr. Tommy Curry. Those two things are connected, and it's not about like letting anybody off in the community, but the violence, all of the violence, including intimate partner violence and domestic violence, are connected to those sociological factors that have a lot to do with the dispossessed, the poverty, and all of that. So I just didn't want.
Well, that's where I was getting to. No, that's exactly where I was getting to.
Okay, keep going then.
I was going to say that with that, right, and even within the idea of violence, right, in terms of Brother Curry, in terms of his book, he talks about women violence in domestic relationships and on black children, right? So all of our community commits it, but I mean, in my opinion, there's a certain type of violence that black men, unfortunately, right, are in a position to do, that we do not only to occasionally to black women, but to other black men too, right? So I think that's there, but I think it's there because of oppression. We also suffer from oppression. When you look at the statistics, and they've been taking statistics from Brother Curry's book, 70% of those brought over in the slave ship were black men, right? So obviously oppression is not new to our community. And when people in the liberal sphere begin to divide up our community and make us fight against each other or play against each other, I also think that plays into the role of black politics that it plays into the role of liberal politics that we should not associate ourselves with, because it ties us to the democratic policies, as opposed to a liberation struggle, which includes all of our people, black men, black women, LGBTQ community, all of that, in terms of a larger liberation struggle, is what we need, as opposed to being divided up and captured, what I call movement capture, by liberal institutions that section us off and then begin to tell us who is the leadership of our community, even though they don't have the politics, right? And it doesn't matter if it's the leadership of a black woman to me, doesn't matter if it's the leadership of a black trans person, doesn't matter if it's the leadership of a black LGBTQ person, doesn't matter if it's the leadership of a cis black male. If you don't have the politics, that's what matters to me. And so putting somebody out front to take the place of people who also didn't have the politics does nothing to me in terms of creating a mass movement, a radical black nationalist movement that is fighting for our liberation and freedom.
Well, these liberals see black nationalism in and of itself as oppressive. Don't get me started. Come on, Omowale. I seen you trying to get in there.
Yeah, because I mean, there's definitely a lot that I want to add here. But I mean, I would go as far as to say, and Brother Kamau, you might disagree with me here, but I don't necessarily believe that we currently have a liberation movement. I don't feel that we are I feel like for the most part, those who are liberation minded are so bogged down with trying to provide the basic necessities to the masses of our people who are left without. Because if we're being very real, right, liberal democracy, capitalism, these things have long since felt Black people. We've long kind of like been on the fringes of society, right? But these institutions are collapsing for everyone at this point. It's just that Black people are a bit more, things are a bit more exacerbated for us because of the racist kind of like paradigm that is involved with it as well. But people who are liberation minded are like putting out fires, right? The work y'all are doing with community movement builders, right? Y'all are trying to feed people. Y'all are trying to fight back against the gentrification that's happening in the community. Same thing here in Philly. Folks like the Peace Park doing the same thing, trying to feed the local community, trying to secure the land, to grow food on the land, trying to push back against gentrification, trying to support the work to bring home our political prisoners. But these are individuals, very small networks of people that not by a long shot does it arrive to the level of movement that we've seen historically where Black people are moving towards the goals of liberation. I think that at this point, you know, the so-called leaders that we have certainly don't have liberation in mind, right? They have money in mind. They have aligning themselves with the Democratic Party in mind. I could make the argument that they are trying to push through certain social reforms, but even as a group, right, the Black community has been balkanized. So we have a situation where individuals are leveraging their particular identity to fight against other people within the group so that they can access some of the resources from the system. So, you know, we're in a very challenging situation. So those of us who kind of like really understand the stakes, you know, right, the like what's really at risk, we're in the middle of a situation like post the Great Reset, right? Post March 15th, 2020, this new world that we
talk about it, the Great Reset.
What I refer to as the controlled demolition of the main institutions in Western society. Like, they're creating a new world. And I think that a lot of us are not prepared to deal with this new reality. And I feel like when you look down the places like in Latin America, right, Argentina, the people who are fighting, you understand, for the land and having the land removed from them, I think that in the near future, I think that will be our reality here in the States. And those folks who are supposed to be our leaders are completely like lost. Can I share my screen really quick, Sister Zakia? I just want to read
absolutely. Just you know, come on and I'll share something for you.
I'll read this quote right here. I have it shared. Okay, so this post is from my son, one of the co-founders of Until Freedom. And this is after Kamala Harris was on Seat of God show last Friday. So he writes, shouts out to Seat of God for saying what we all been thinking. It's disappointing that questioning this administration that a lot of us voted in makes us sound like Republicans instead of Americans. First of all, he's lost calling himself an American right away. He's completely lost, right? Then he goes on to say, there were campaign promises mainly about justice and policing, creating Black wealth, and ending student loans. None of the things she talked about was the platform that this administration ran on. We were hoodwinked and led astray. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just like hearing him say we were hoodwinked and led astray, is like, no, like, you weren't hoodwinked at all. Like the people were telling y'all that y'all are misleading our people, that y'all are pulling our people back onto the plantation. Y'all are selling our people out. And y'all were saying, well, if y'all not going to vote, then what we going to do? Like, y'all were not.
So many of us were saying that.
Anything that the people were saying. How are you going to be a leader of the people when you don't listen to the people? And because these folks have position and connections, like they have the biggest microphones. Tamika Mallory can go on to the Grammy stage and give a speech, right? So y'all are the ones that are misleading the people and hoodwinking the people. It's not the Democratic Party, because our people know what it is, but it's y'all who are sent into our community on behalf of the Democratic Party to hoodwink and mislead us. So I think that we have the responsibility of exposing this type of misleadership and showing that their interests are not aligned with the interests of our people. So
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that's on point. I think, as we probably talked about the last time we were here, I think at one point, our last upheaval of what I would consider a real liberation movement was in the 60s and 70s. And I think that liberation movement was defeated, right? And I think what happened at the same time that you had COINTELPRO, what people famously point to as the FBI's program, which I'd like to make sure that people understand. That wasn't the FBI's program. That was the U.S. federal government's program.
That's right.
And the FBI ran point, right?
That's
that
right.
that program was. That was meant to destroy the Black liberation movement, a revolutionary movement, a radical movement, a nationalist movement, one that was fighting about land, or was fighting about owning, controlling institutions, one that's fighting around the interests of Black people all around the world in terms of Pan-Africanism, and talking about Black liberation struggles all over the world being connected to our struggle, that was talking about international struggles all over the world being connected to our struggle, because we were all victims of capitalism. Yeah. That type of national liberation movement was destroyed. And in its place, what was allowed to survive and to strive was a reformist integrationist movement, which has dominated any aspect of a so-called freedom struggle since that time period. It's been given resources. It's been had the setup in terms of what we call the nonprofit industrial setup. It's been given access to magazine covers, access to political leaders. Folks have voted on a certain, people have ran for office on a certain political line, Democrats, and have encouraged our masses to vote as the only option now available, as people mostly see it. My only distinction is that I think underneath that current, all of the parties understand that there is still a seed and a desire for a national liberation movement of Black people. Hence the use of Black liberation language, even in these reform movements, which have now talked about self-determination, which now use the language of Black liberation, right? That's talk about freedom, even some that claim to be anti-capitalist in nature, right? So the language of national liberation is still alive and thriving, but it is thriving under the discourse of a more liberal leadership, which, as Omowale talked about or brought out, has ties to the Democratic apparatus, the Democratic Party, and ties to the liberal institutions that are overwhelmingly white controlled, whose desire and design is to keep Black people in the Democratic Party, to keep Black people voting as the main tool of any kind of so-called resistance, and to tell Black people that this is our only hope for liberation and freedom, and that everything else and or anything else that our people want to fight for or desire to have is something that is no longer on the table, is something that is no longer eligible for us to pursue or our desire to have. I will say that some of the work of some of the institutions, some of the organizations over the last 7 to 8 years that actually kicked off after Trayvon Martin was killed, and later on after Mike Brown, again, had radical edges to them. But these larger organizations that were funded by the nonprofit industrial complex, by some of these foundations, even when some people had best intentions, even if I give benefit of doubt, they obviously were meant to pull people back into a policy arena of voting for Democrats, whether locally or federally, in order to correct a problem which is never going to be corrected through a voting mechanism.
That's right. Never. And I'm glad that you said that. So, we talked a lot about, kind of examining what the issue is. I'm actually wondering, how do we effectively confront these people, right? Confront those who've been platformed and credentialed, if you will, that work against us and work against actual Black liberation.
I don't even know if it's for me, the old saying where they say like nothing succeeds like success. Like you have to create, and it's unfortunate that I have to even call it a counter narrative, but we have to build organizations and we have to build institutions that serve the people, organizations and institutions that have the right politics and have the right ideology, right? So that you can distinguish between the two. But at the end of the day, I don't know if it is possible to destroy, right, the misleaders, right? Because they are state sponsored, they're state funded, they're state supported. So I'm really not sure if there's a way, other than permanently deleting them. You understand what I'm saying? And I don't think that we are, I don't think that we are at that point. But other than that, like, I'm really not sure if there's a way, because I feel like when you raise critique, like, you just get written off as, like, a hater, or you know what I mean. You're just somebody ranting from the winds of social media. So it's like, what do you do? So I'm not sure I have the answers to that.
I mean, I would add, I agree with the first part of obviously we have to organization build, we have to build institutions, and there's times in history when we don't know what the next thing that will happen that will make a material change that will open up people's eyes. And again, if we were better placed, better organized, had better infrastructure during the time of some of the greater uprisings, we could have taken advantage of that moment. And what I mean by that is we could have helped politicize people into certain organizational structures. I think we're at an important inflection point when it comes to the American empire. I think there's overseas, there's China that's rising to challenge a multipolar world from a single polar world, right? So there's international competition that's on the rise. China will soon be the biggest economy in the world. Their military is growing. There is a resistance, even if it's not resistance that all of us necessarily agree with all the time, but there are different pockets of resistance that are sometimes based on spirituality or religion, and sometimes based on ideology that's happening across the world that sees alternatives to having to depend on Western capitalism and imperialism, or their Western bodies and international bodies. I think here at home, domestically, there's an upheaval happening because of the demographic shifts that are happening in America. White people are scared of not being the majority of the country. And I always say one thing about white folks: they will fight not to be controlled by anybody. You may not like it. Anybody may not like it, but white folks will not allow themselves to feel like they are being controlled by anybody. And that means for white folks, things that we saw on January 6th are but one example of what there is to come. The build out of militias, the build out of all the guns that's out there in society now, that obviously started under the Obama administration. Them seeing a liberal Black president was too much for them to take. And they started arming themselves at a level never seen before. And that has only increased over the last 12 years. So there's a cracking of whatever social contract even these right wingers had with this larger country. I think, in my estimation, again, even if there's things about what has been coined the Black Lives Matter movement or era, there's things about that could be looked at through having radical politics or an insurgence being brought to the forefront of struggle, unlike we haven't seen in a long time. And that's been happening for at least now another about 6, 7, 8 years. That also has been something that's been with us. So those of us who have radical impulses, politics, who are creating institutions and organizations, we must be better prepared, because this moment is continual, at least in my estimation, for another 10, 20 years. Mixed within that, obviously, the COVID.
Can you clarify what moment for the next 10 or 20 years?
That there's a moment right now of America potentially as a domestic, as an empire coming apart.
Oh, it ain't gonna be that long. I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah, no, I think there's because I think the state still has power. That is still,
yeah, it does.
Not only police power, but military power, National Guard power. There's still resources in its control that it still has. But at the same time, I see a breaking apart of what's happening on the ground, and it's a matter of, what's the material conditions and where it goes, how it goes. But must be prepared for that.
But the material conditions of our population is rapidly and continuously declining, which is why you see on mainstream media and other parts of television, why you see all of these distractions. That's keeping most people, on the opioid, as they say, right? That's actually I'm gonna let you come in a minute, Omowale. But to me, based on what Omowale just highlighted, and I feel like I don't see enough Black nationalists, Pan African people even talking about this. But this great reset, the AI, the robots, that shit ain't gonna be 10 to 20 years. I mean, by 2030, all that shit is gonna be full-fledged. I mean, out there. They're laying the groundwork for it now. We're not even talking about blockchain technology and what that means. I mean, I know y'all have started talking about it on Black Power Media. But like, we are not prepared at all. And to me, I get really sad when I think about that. When I think about the conditions that Black people will be in America. Our people in Africa, our people in South America, I think they're going to handle it better than us, to be honest with you, because they haven't had access to all of this, technology and all of these distractions. I mean, I know I'm like getting off topic a little bit.
No, you're not off topic at all.
Connected.
No, you're not off topic at all. I think my point in that, and I'm going to let Omowale come in, is that all of that is part of what's happening in terms of the social combustion. I'm saying that word wrong. That is about to happen.
Right.
I do think there's a timeline to. I think we're already in a moment, and at that moment is going to stretch out another 20 or 30 years. I mean, the deindustrialization, again, the way the economy is ripping, the COVID crisis, which is going to be with us for a while. That's all there that talks about the breaking up of a country. And then the question becomes, as Omowale presented earlier, is are we ready? And as you were saying, are we ready, and or will we be ready, not only to provide for our people, but seriously to fight a battle which is going to be on the ground. And so gathering the tools, gathering the people power, creating the institutions, creating the organizational apparatus on the ground, that part, even if there's distractions out there, I put that on those of us who at least claim to have some vision about what Black liberation should look like. So we have to do that work. And there's openings to do that work, and those will continue. And either we will rise to the occasion or we will fall as a people even further down than we think we are now. And there's always further you can go.
Yeah,
absolutely. My book 2022 Combat Ready Lifestyle will be will be released in 2022, because that's more so just what I'm concerned with, because all these things that you're talking about have already come online.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about on the internet. I mean, like, come online, like they're already in place, right?
absolutely.
The early adoption is already taking place, and we have a situation where, wow, there was something that I wanted to say, and I feel like I'm losing my thought here, because it was a very important point that I wanted to make. What were you saying, Zakia? You were. It wasn't about the Great Reset. Okay, this is what I wanted to make. The point that I wanted to make. What scares me about Black people, specifically in the United States, is that I used to be a fervent believer in what Garvey used to say, that when all else fails to organize the people, the conditions will.
Yeah.
I used to be a real believer in the potential of the atmosphere and the environment pushing Black people into action and into organization. But what Trump showed me, and what the pandemic has shown me, is that Black people
Say that
are far more slave-like than I have been willing to accept and acknowledge, right? I feel like with the Western world coming apart and these institutions starting to crumble, they have to bring online a much more fascist-like surveillance state, and they have to bring on a lot more control. And basically, in order to do that, of course, they're going to have to rip up, their constitution, which never really applied to Black people anyway. But any semblance of rights,
right,
they're going to have to
it's a wrap.
Do away with for the sake of security and for the sake of protecting the 1%. And what this last decade has shown me is that a lot of our people in general, but I'm talking about Black people, are too willing to fall in line and nestle up under the bosom of capitalism and of power if we think that it's going to mean some form of comfort or a false sense of security. And I think that that is going to involve, people snitching on other people. I mean, even if you look at the way that the C-19 crisis is playing out and how that is splitting Black America in terms of when people were talking about, forcing people to take slices of pizza versus people being able to choose for themselves if they want to consume the slice of pizza, right? If you understand what I'm saying, if you understand like the politics around that and the way that Black people are responding to it, I mean, I feel like government overreach in order to maintain control of the masses and to repress any potential political movement in the years to come is going to be extreme. And I won't say that it scares me, but I think that it is a very real reality that a lot of our people are too willing to fall in line and survive hand to mouth. And by hand to mouth, I mean universal basic income. You understand what I'm saying? And what's crazy about that, I was speaking on this recently because everybody's favorite guy, Andrew Yang, recently went on to the Rich Roll podcast, and they were having a conversation about UBI. Now, UBI is supposed to be their solution to the technological unemployment crisis. And what Andrew Yang stated was that, what they found out based upon the samples that they've had of UBI like policies is that giving people checks without labor is not a good idea. Well, I'm like, okay, y'all were billing this thing as, there won't be any labor, so we're just going to give people checks so that they can pursue, their artistic interests and, go off and be creative. But now y'all are saying that, well, to give them checks without working is a bad idea. So what are you going to have people doing for their $1,500 a month? Am I going to have to go and sweep the subway? No, they'll probably have robots to do that. So like, what am I going to have to do? Right? What am I going to have to do to be fed? What does compliance look like? And we already know this is going to come with strings attached. You're going to have to eat the slice of pizza if you want that check. You're going to have to do lots of things if you want that $1,500 a month. And I'm just saying that Black people are not really ready for that new reality. And too many of us are more than willing to accept whatever conditions they impose on us. And we are definitely going to rat out people who don't want to go alone and get along. And I'm like, man, this is scary hours right now.
Hey man, I'm so glad that you said that, because I have been reluctant to just say what you just said, like how comfortable Black people are being enslaved. Like that hurt, man. You know what I mean? Like that hurts, because that's why I made a distinction between Black people here in this empire versus Black people who are living in so-called third world countries. You know what I mean? Because I mean, as far as like, I'll give you a prime example. And these are conversations I have with people that I love and respect. People who probably see themselves as radical, I would say, are defending universal basic income. And I was just like, that's another form of slavery. I don't understand how you don't see that there are going to be strings attached to it. Like these people always lie to us. Why would you believe that? And I have to say, it's oftentimes with people who have PhDs. And I'm not anti-intellectual, but most of the people that I see that want to force people to eat the pizza, oh, you best believe they're PhDs. You best believe that they are the educated ones.
They're not just that; they African centered too.
Did you see?
It's a lot of them out here. They wear dashikis. They African centered. They is a lot of craziness out here, and I'm just letting people get their MacArthur checks, and I'm minding my business.
I'm gonna jump in a little bit. Yeah, so I'm gonna disagree slightly on a couple of points. One is, I think there's always in resistance movements or in amongst an oppressed people, there's always a class that's going to sell those folks out. That's history. That's a historic thing where whether we call them the comprador class, the petty bourgeoisie, there's a class that feeds off the material interests of the larger population and will sell out that larger population because of the nickels, dimes, and pennies that they get off the plate of the larger capitalist class. And they'll position themselves, again, to be the spokespeople for Black folks, to say that they know what's best for Black folks. I think that's always part of a struggle. And I think that within the United States context, historically, Black people at times have been, not exclusively, but at times have been a leading force of struggle, a leading force of what radical change can look like. Everything from Black folks being communists to Black folks joining the UNIA in massive numbers across the world, but particularly here in the United States, to the 60s and 70s upheavals and uprisings and the radicalism, which helped spread to other places, as well as the radical ideas that came here that helped us in terms of uplifting our own struggle from a so-called integration struggle to a national liberation struggle. So I think the ingredients are here. And again, I think over the last 7 to 8 years, we've seen uprisings, insurrections. We've seen Black people ready to burn property down, as well as anarchists and whites and all the rest of it, but Black people too, right? Again, our so-called middle-class leaderships like to go out there and say, oh no, it was those anarchists that burnt that down. I've seen some pictures too. I know some people too. So it ain't, you know, historically speaking and current day, our folks will go on the offensive, right?
I didn't understand why Black people was like, oh, Black people didn't do that. We didn't burn nothing down.
That's like, if it's in our interest to burn it down, we should burn it down. Yes. So I think, so I say all that to say that I think there's the flame of resistance that I think the state knows is there and will go through tremendous means to stop that resistance from flourishing, i.e. the stuff that we came to talk about, which was how movement has been captured, which is no accident, because I think there is a feeling of the resistance that Black people potentially will offer because of our history here in the States, and even what that resistance can mean overseas to people who will see us really resisting, right? And again, I think it's each one, obviously each one teach one. We learn from what's happening across the world, and we also bring it here. So I think those things are part of a trajectory of struggle, which sometimes will go in our favor and sometimes not. And then again, depending on the dialectics, right, or the material conditions, we will see how far we get. We will see whether or not those of us who consider ourselves to be radical revolutionary leaders have put the things in place to help lead us towards a larger liberation struggle, or will we not learn from the mistakes of the past and be crushed again by the state?
It's tough, brother, because I don't know. I feel like when we examine revolutions and revolutionary energy and direction, I feel like there's like a macro trend, and then there are smaller pockets of revolutionary activity where people are responding to the material conditions they are being met with. Mm-hmm. But I feel like the macro trends or winds of revolution have never gotten off track. Mm. And what I basically mean by that is this notion that is embedded in a lot of European revolutionary theory, this notion of the so-called, progressing to the end of history, right? Progressing to this point of utopia, and the ideas that need to be advanced to get us there. I don't think that's gotten off track at all. In fact, I think that they've done a great job of pulling up stakes whenever necessary to keep progressing towards that goal or that objective of reaching the end of history. And Kamau, your face looked you gave that look like end of history. Like, what is this Negro talking about?
Are you talking about communist politics, or are you talking about like the the idea that we are taking on communist politics and that's a disservice to our movement?
Well,
What do you mean by that?
So when I talk about the idea of the end of history, I do think that communist politics absolutely plays a role in that, right? Because the fundamental theory that undergirds it all, right? This theory of progress, and I'm gonna butcher it here if I try to speak on it off the cuff. So I rather write about it so I can like point to and reference their stuff. But if I try to do it some service here, the fundamental idea that animates their so-called progress, right? The whole like dialectic, is that there are certain changes within. How do I say this? See, Kamau, you asking me good questions. The fundamental idea that animates all of their theories of progress, including communism, which is one of their ideas of progress, is that there's going to reach a point in the flow of society or the flow of time where we will arrive at a point of zero oppression, true freedom, and true liberation for all. And I think that, they refer to that as the so-called utopian ideal. And these ideas or politics are meant to advance it, right? So when you look at, I guess, communism, in the 19th century, but then you get the I forget the new school that came under what's my guy's name, Herbert Marcuse, and those other kind of like European thinkers that were looking back and were analyzing that and were making the changes. I think that as things continue to progress forward, you get these continued new theories, whether it be postmodernism or it be queer theory, but all of them are pointing or pushing us in a direction that I don't believe has ever gotten off track. And the reason why I bring that up is when you look at this current iteration of the movement, the Black movement, the energy and direction of our fight has largely been dictated by that particular set of politics. I think that there's a reason why those who were on the forefront of this movement, they came out very early on labeling Black men as their oppressors. And I think
yes,
their movement has been animated by a set of ideas and thoughts that are not, I don't think they're necessarily germane to us. I think that it has something else in mind. So yes, I think that in the 60s and the 70s, our movement was a lot more, the Black liberation movement reached a point where communism and the Black liberation movement were moving in the same direction. It seemed like there might have been some mutual benefit or interest. But I think that communism, and this is just my thinking, it's no longer the driving political theory in our generation. I think now postmodernism and queer theory, which are extensions of the communist idea, are in the driver's seat, and
absolutely,
Black people have not delinked ourselves from that particular idea in the direction that it's going. And I think that there's a danger in that as well. Now, I'm sorry because I'm riffing off the hip here, but I'm writing about this in my book, so the ideas will be a bit more concrete when I write about them. But I'm just riffing because I just
yeah. No, I think it's a good discussion. I think as I see it, communism, revolutionary nationalism, socialism, left ideas that are anti-capitalist should play and have played and will continue to play a huge and large role in the direction of a liberation struggle that doesn't want to just replace capitalist white folks with capitalist Black folks, right? Because part of our oppression of racism is also about the economic system that supports that racism, but can be separated from that system. I'm not one who believes that the prejudice and or white supremacy we face is solely based on capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's based on culture, it's based on economics, it's based on people being fed a certain ideology. So I think part of the solution to that, which I don't think is exclusively a European thought process, right? Rodney wrote about this, Kwame Nkrumah wrote about this, Cabral wrote about this. Folks who have followed liberation, other national liberation struggles, the Vietnamese liberation struggle, other liberation struggles have used some of the ideas which are further back than Marx or communism to help propel them to fight against a capitalist interest and Western imperialism. So I think we are an international people, as I know you do too. So I think for us, those are part of our tools, just as culture is a part of our tool, right? African-based societal culture is a part of our tool. And I will say lastly on the idea of what gets us free, I think it's great that younger people than myself, whether I agree with everything they say or not, are coming up with new theories, i.e. queer theories that involve queer theory, i.e. theories that are not necessarily new at this stage, but theories on womanism and or Black feminism or whatever, that some of us may not completely agree with, some of us may, but I think those are good introduction theories for us to wrestle with and not necessarily be completely dismissive of. Because I think theories that help us understand the larger trajectory of not just a revolutionary struggle, which is one thing, but a running and building a larger society in which people of different either ethnic groups, different languages, potentially people different sexualities, people who are exploring their genders. All of that is part of larger society, which either we deal with or we don't. And if you don't deal with it, those people will start to deal with it on their own terms, just like we will deal with white oppressors on our terms. So I have no problem having discussions and talking about different theories and saying what makes sense in terms of what makes sense for us to generally either adopt or struggle around. And then lastly, what is being imposed on us to keep us a part of a liberal capitalist system. And what I think, in my own estimation, the idea of this so-called representation model of politics, which again has always been there, and it actually started with putting Black men in charge of certain things, and that was a certain sort of a representation of politics, which we were supposed to be appreciative of, because those were the first. And now we've moved on to the first Black woman, the first. And we're moving on to the first Black queers, who are first. And those politics are driving us to think that America will one day open up, or America is opening up, and we can be a part of America. Those politics I do not agree with because they are not linked to politics. They're linked to being American and being part of the American institutions and carrying on the imperialism and making excuses. But I am not scared to be linked with politics, which I think are a radical exploration into what new society should look like so that we don't duplicate what we're trying to leave behind. And I think those discussions are necessary and part of the brew that we should have, as well as African-centered culture, right? I do not want to leave that out because I think it's important to talk about there is a root culture that obviously has some diversity to it, but where we come from. But it doesn't also mean that that root culture was perfect, right? You'll have to deal with things that happened in Africa before Europeans came, which were not brought by Europeans. Where we talk about vaginal mutilation, right? Certain practices, or there are practices that even outdate themselves. The problem, one of the biggest problems with Western imperialism, obviously in terms of suppression, but it doesn't allow us to solve our own problems because it puts new problems on top of the old problems because they're too busy trying to rule us, and we can't even think through the ideas of what newfound culture and struggle look like. So for me, all of that is part and parcel and a complicated mix of what we have to think through and be a part of in terms of creating new realities on the ground, which will mean liberation for us and not a repeat of oppression and repressionary ideas and tactics that we put upon our people.
Yeah, I
I
think
feel like this is a replay of at the University of Cincinnati with Malefi Asante and
no, it's not that. I think. Listen,
go ahead.
I'm not qualified to be in those shoes. I'm a slow thinker. That's why I like to write, because when I write, I can really lay out my arguments very well. But what I'll say is this: I feel like the revolutionary winds that a lot of us are caught up in are pushing society at large to a place where the state has increasing power to oppress us collectively. I do feel like we're being pushed. The inevitable direction is, more and more closer towards this so-called like one world government that is really not responsive to any of our demands, because it's a one world government that is just a security apparatus to protect the 1% that basically presently own the wealth um, of the planet. So I'm I am I am hesitant, right? Because when I look at some of these ideas and I look at some of these theories and I try to push them to their logical conclusion, right? If I map them out, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, and I see, okay, what is their end goal and vision for liberation? And I look at that vision, and to me, it looks like slavery. It looks like a powerful state. It looks like, again, the, labor, as long as the direction of the economy continues to go in this way in terms of with technology, labor as we knew it is not coming back, right? So this is a new way of living for humanity. Like I'm just saying, as all these things come online, right? I feel like some of our stuff, our conversations are almost like antiquated, because like, I mean, 21st century is the century of not only AI, but I mean, come on, like transhumanism is coming online. Like
Yes.
you have people who, because of their wealth status, can afford to basically pick and select the genetics they want their offspring,
There it is.
to have. So I just feel like there's so much that's
It's an evolved eugenics.
agreed. So I'm just saying, like, the one thing that you and I absolutely agree on is that the future state of relations between mankind is absolutely going to be heightened conflict and war, and we should all be preparing for that and developing the skill sets that we need to be able to feed ourselves and heal ourselves and take care of ourselves, because things are going to get very ugly. But I'm very weary of, because I understand that culture is pushed forward by the youth, and each young generation gets a new iteration of the revolutionary ideology that's pushing them towards the so-called end of history. And when I look at that end and that idea, I don't see it as liberation. I see it as a new and more refined, matter of fact, perfected slavery.
That's right. That's right.
That's my perspective when I look at it. So that's dangerous.
I just say quickly, I don't believe individually. I don't believe in the end of history. I don't believe that there's any such thing as solving all human problems in a perfect society.
But you're aware that that idea exists, though,
Of
right?
course, no. Yes, I mean, it's one reason why I don't officially.
Their politics.
Yeah, it's one reason why I don't call myself a communist.
Okay.
Even though I have communist leanings, I mean, I definitely call myself a socialist.
Mm-hmm.
But I also consider myself a nationalist. I consider myself my core politics are revolutionary nationalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean, again, that I think we all believe this, is that there are definitely ways that we can improve the human condition by a hell of a lot compared to what we have now. And part of the struggle is doing that because there are others who benefit off of the current conditions and who want to lead us to even more severe restrictions on our liberty, on our ability to control our labor, on our movement, on how we do things, what we do things, when we do things. That, and as you said, that's currently in place. We have fools who think they're going to go into space and colonize Mars because they don't want to deal with the issues on the planet that they've helped create. So they're also thinking about Musk. Yeah, so they're also thinking about their next place to colonize.
Yeah.
Right. So that's all in play right now. Right. But it does not mean to me that there's not a radical revolutionary movement to be had to help fight and change our circumstances, even when there's contradictions within that. I'm comfortable with contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
I think contradictions are needed. I think it's okay to disagree. In fact, I think one of the problems with radicals or revolutionary organizations is that they look for purity of thought as opposed to a mixture of ideas that can cohabitate together. And sometimes I think it's the role of the leadership in radical or revolutionary movements is to hold its own center together, and it can learn something from the early stages of Western imperialism, capitalism, and or U.S. invented state, where they figured out how to hold a center by creating a system that allowed argument but not disintegration.
Yeah.
We have not necessarily clearly created that. We are too busy, and one reason why our organization stays small, because the slightest disagreement leads to a non-working relationship, leads to name calling and hatred, and obviously some of that is plugged through what the state sees as openings to make that even deeper.
Yes,
but a lot of that still is on us because we have not figured that out. We'd rather be, as we've spoken about before, we'd rather have 10 organizations with 6 people each than to have one organization with 60 people in collective leadership.
Yeah.
And that's part of our problem, even as what I would call a left and or radical revolutionary movements. And so,
I've learned a couple of things, right? I think the most important organization that we as Black people need to develop is a media organization.
Yeah.
Right? I was reading Garvey, and he talked about when he wanted to organize the UNIA, the first thing he set out to do was to create a media apparatus in order to organize the people. So he created the Negro world. Now, if you look at how media and propaganda is controlled today, I mean, like the 6 largest institutions are basically controlled by like 5 people. You understand what I'm saying?
Exactly.
They are imprinting the minds and the consciousness of the larger global society. So we as Black people have to figure out how we can break through. So, I mean, even me personally, a lot of my change and strategy has been, I have to figure out how to build a mass media apparatus, and I don't think that can be done without some form of like entertainment or whatever to basically collect people and then work from there. So that's the first point I want to raise. The second point is this, though, because I absolutely agree with you that there are revolutionary things that can be done to change the conditions that we are presently met with. The paradox in that is that we have the technology to feed everyone. We have the technology to house everyone, to clothe everyone. However, the way in which we currently live on the planet is not in alignment with the natural way of doing things, right? This way of living is not sustainable, right? 1% of the people can't have all the wealth and that be sustained. So those who are currently in control that fund the institutions and create the institutions, their interest is basically, they don't have an interest in us living longer lives or having improved conditions. They are more concerned with decreasing the population on the planet because you have this huge population and people don't have a means to kind of like take care of themselves. I mean, that creates revolution, right? That creates destabilization because it leads to discontentment. So they are very concerned and hyper focused on how do they decrease the number of people on the planet, because they don't have it set in their minds that they're giving back any of this wealth that they've stolen. No. The only way you get that wealth back is you pull it out of their dead hands. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm cautious. I don't want our people to be misled into believing that we can create better conditions. I put it like this: I want our people to fully understand what revolution means. And when it comes down to it, revolution means blood. Revolution means death.
Yes.
The people who've stolen the resources of the planet are not giving them back via the vote. They are not giving them back because you asked nicely.
Right.
They're not giving them back because you design a nice PowerPoint and say, this is how we can feed 350 million people. They're not giving them back for anything.
It's not happening.
And they are building power. They are building machines. They are building death machines to protect themselves and the wealth that they have. This is why I think, Brother Kamau, man, you may have spoken about this. I think that when they were pushing for defund the police, I'm like, oh, that's just a neoliberal, agenda, because that's only going to impact. Well, they always want to, defund public things, but that's really just going to impact the poor, because the wealthy are going to have their own private police. They're going to have their own private military. So it's you and I who are going to be impacted, not them. So,
well, even more importantly, it's never going to happen because the state uses the police for a particular purpose.
That's exactly right.
So, so even, and that brings us back to the sort of the way movement is liberalized, that we think we can use radical language like abolitionists when it has had radical connotations going back to George Jackson for liberal means or liberal talking points, right? The state won't be defunding the police, nor will they be abolishing the police, because the very nature of how the state operates is that it needs the police for social control, right? And so they may shift some funding to make you feel good about it, right? They may decide to not arrest as many homeless people for a couple of years, but the idea that there's, the idea that that the current society as structured somehow is going to abolish police is on its face, kind of a ridiculous notion. I think even those who claim to be pushing it because they're claiming to push a politic, which again, I'm not necessarily completely mad at, but I think if that was the case, then you would find a place where you had the ability to put this into practice and to see if you can make it work. And if you do not do, and then, and just because I know of an area, Jackson, Mississippi, where Chokwe Lumumba Jr., who says he's the most radical mayor in the country, and has all those connections with all of the movements who claim to want to abolish the police or who claim to want to defund the police. Right there and then is the natural place to institute and to see how that would work. But that's not what's happening. Instead, it's a general conversation and it's a talking point, but there's no implementation of the idea, because even there, that system has no compunction whatsoever to abolish the police force, because that's the public army of cities, because we don't have a national police force in the United States. Policing is done locally, but don't think that it's not connected by larger federal agencies. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but the point is that the even the use of language like that, we can't take seriously, as in the point of it is that the police are going to get abolished. In the state apparatus we have, in the capitalist apparatus we have, in the 1% powerful situation that we have, the police serve the role of protecting those folks, and the rest of us are excess labor and or fodder to be used.
Obsolete labor.
So that's, absolutely. Exactly. Which means to be hoarded back into prisons, or like you said, to be able to die slow deaths in certain neighborhoods, as long as we don't come out of those neighborhoods and interfere with where the wealth is, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's also part of the dilemma of what a real movement thinks about and tries to do, as opposed to simply sloganeering about something that sounds radical,
but
people won't be implemented.
Our people right now are walking through the desert looking for a well. And what I mean by that, the desert, I'm talking in economic terms. Right. We've always been migrating either for most of the migrations that we've seen as our people here in the United States have been part economic driven. I think that's been the primary, but then I think the secondary has been, okay, we got to escape kind of like these harsh conditions in the South. But you get a situation where we migrate to these northern cities for, as Isabel Wilkerson refers to it, the warmth of other suns, right? We migrate to these northern ghettos so that we can hopefully work in the factories and provide for our family and send funds back down south to help our family out down there.
Yep.
We get to the north and what happens? Right? Divestment happens in those communities. The employment
immediately,
it dries up. The well dries up. So
they built the suburbs,
50 and 60 years, but now the market forces, the market forces in our communities are doing the same thing that they did to Indian reservations, right? So the Indians were on these reservations, but okay, now that land is worth something for casinos. It's worth something for oil. It's worth something for water. So now we got to move them off the land, but it's like, where are we going? Because we aren't migrating like, I mean, I guess everybody's running to Atlanta because they think Atlanta is like a mirage in the desert. You know how in the desert you look and say, oh, there's like palm. That's what Atlanta is for Black people. Everybody is running to Atlanta, and it's like, no, like that's actually not what it is. And it's like, what are we gonna do? Because a lot of our folks are being pushed out of Philly, being pushed out of Newark, being pushed out of Brooklyn, being pushed out of Harlem. But where are we going? Where are we going? That's
being pushed out of DC.
That's the question, though. Where are we going? Like, how are we going to survive without the hope of employment?
Here's the thing, and I know I feel like we talked about this a little bit, Omowale, but it's real quiet. But a lot of Black people are actually leaving America altogether. Like, I mean, I think I went and visited some family over in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. My cousin relocated his entire family, small children, everything, to Tanzania, and I couldn't wait to go and visit. It's my first time on the continent, my first time in Africa, and so we had a conversation. I'm like, well, why'd you choose here? What's special about this particular country, this particular city? And I asked him, I said, well, how many Black Americans are here? He said thousands. I was like, recent, like, expats? He was like, yeah. He said, there's thousands here. And I was just like, wow. I feel like, it's just happening and people aren't really talking about it, but like, Black people ain't crazy. Those of us who we're like what we're talking about now, like we see the writing on the wall with America.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are getting the F out of here. Like, bye, Like they love their family and everything, but they like, it's a lot cheaper and it's easier. You can actually live off the land here. You know what I mean? Your daily expenses aren't the same, so I just wanted to throw that in there because there are a lot of people not just moving to Ghana, because I know everybody's talking about Ghana, but Black folks are moving all over the continent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to douse the flames of that, except to say that, there's going to be millions of us still here because most of us won't have the means and mechanisms. And even when we travel to other places, there's still struggles to be had because Western imperialism knows no borders.
Exactly.
It's but I concur.
Right.
I have a good friend of mine who's a Haitian radical revolutionary who grew up in Haiti and obviously came here and has done work over here too, who says, one reason why she maintains her ties to Haiti and goes back, has, her family still has a home there. And she makes sure that she wants to raise her child there, is that as bad as it is, in terms of some of the economic challenges, she's like, we're one step removed from white governance, and she knows there's obviously an overlay in terms of the American power over Haiti, but obviously a lot of folks who are trying to have the experience of not having the overt day-to-day racism, which forced them to move out of New York because the gentrification was happening and the police were ticketing more, stopping people more. Like a lot of the stories of the reverse migration back to the South.
Did y'all read that story on Nipsey Hussle?
I didn't read the Nipsey Hussle story, but I was going to quickly say a lot of the stories about the reverse migration back to the South are very, very similar to the first migration from the South to the North, in terms of the police brutality and the economic conditions were driving folks to say we should go back home, what they considered home to be where where our first forefathers in terms of where we were landed in the South, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what's the Nipsey Hussle story?
Well, it's a story about the land developers, the city, local government, and the police were applying pressure because that piece of property that he purchased, where the Marathon clothing store was headquartered, like that property it was a central location that the developers had in mind, and they wanted to take advantage of, kind of like Trump opportunity zones. So like they were really, it was the developers, the city, and the police were really targeting and harassing Nipsey and that everybody who went in and out of that location, and it's all documented at this point, right? So my thing is, when we start talking about stuff like colonialism and things like that, I mean, you have the same thing in our local cities. Like, that's why I like, for me, when I tell black people don't vote, I'm more so trying to awaken black people to the fact that this particular political system it's non-responsive to your demands and to your needs. So I'm not saying abandon organizing, because I do think we have to organize for political power and organize to get our needs met. But I don't think that we have the resources, human resources, political resources, to give all our energy over
Mm-hmm.
to a system and to political parties that are not going to do for us. So I think that, we have to, we have to be really like radicalized. And the thing that hurts me the most is just that I don't know if I see it. I don't see us necessarily reaching the level of radicality. I just made up a word there, level of radicalism that we need to reach in order to get the changes that we need. I feel like we are too imprisoned by comfort. So they can string us along with the hope of comfort and with the hope of change and keep us right in pocket as they are slowly killing us.
This shit is crazy. But I mean, you're right. I mean, I actually am holding out hope that will change, though, brother. But this is the final question that I got for y'all, and we wrap this up. We're a little bit over an hour now. This has been great. I don't know if y'all have been seeing it, but the chat has been off the chain.
Mm-hmm.
um, so, like, basically what you said, what do you believe? And this is for both of y'all. What do you believe our major focus should be in organizing of our people under a Black nationalist or revolutionary Pan African nationalist banner?
Um, I'll let Kamau go last since he's the elder statesman in the room, and I'll let him mic drop on us, right? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna say my perspective is always think globally, act locally.
Okay.
I do think that I'm of the mind that the Western Empire is undergoing a controlled demolition, and I feel like Black people, African people, especially here in the belly of the beast or in the empire, are going to be trapped, under the rubble, like when the towers come down, if we don't de-link ourselves. You know what I mean? It's a situation where, in King's generation, he said, he fears he may have sent his people into a burning building. Well, now the building is not only burning, the building is marked for demolition, and Black people are still trying to run to the 100th floor. Like, you're trying to run to the 100th floor in a building where, like, the dynamite has already been staged, right? They're ready to press the boom on it, and you're still in the building, right? And by in the building, I mean you're still participating in the institutions. You're still fairly like linked to it for your livelihood. So for me, I'm always trying to encourage us that, hey, we have to de-link, and you can't do it as an individual, right? So my hope is in us coming together, really grounding ourselves in both a cultural and revolutionary politic that allows us to survive as a group, because we can't survive as individuals in this situation. I think the problem is a lot of our identity is locked to American identity. So that's why you hear my son saying, like, as Americans, you know what I mean? Like, you hear so many Black people, like, their identity, like, they believe that they are like American citizens. And I'm like, yeah, we're residents here. Citizenship has always been aspirational. We fought for it, but we've never, been treated as citizens, and we never will be. And if we understand kind of like the writing on the wall, then I'm just pushing us to organize around the vital needs: food, clothing, shelter, protection. Can we come together and organize around those things? And more importantly, knowledge exchange. There's so much, like, that we need to be learning, right, about there's a lot that we need to learn in order to survive what's about to come. Like it doesn't just see like, yeah, you need to have guns and things like that, but it's not just that. Like white folks out here where I'm at, like, you know, they're canning food, they're doing all types of stuff beyond just like arming up. You know what I mean? They got the what's that antibiotic that everybody always needs? You know what I mean? Whatever it is, they're storing up
amoxicillin,
whatever it is. I'm just saying they're storing up on like antibiotics, all types of stuff. So it's like, yo, like, what are we going to do when the shit hits the fan?
I'm so scared about that.
Are we going to be prepared to meet that reality? And the answer right now is no, we are absolutely not. So if you're asking me, what am I pushing Black people towards? Well, I'm pushing us away from the system, and I'm pushing us towards each other and figuring out how we can organize at a grassroots level to get our needs met as a collective. That's pretty much it. Frank said penicillin.
And you know, I mean, I'm gonna double down on that, brother. I think you mic dropped. So I agree. I think it's organizing on the grassroots level, right? We need to control organization and institutions. We need to create power for ourselves and our community. And I think, you know, there's things that are tactics that are not end games. So I will say I don't mind voting as long as it's a tactic in a larger struggle around power and gaining resources. As long as we don't think all of our time and energy is going to need to go into this one tool, which was not used to oppress us, and so certainly is not going to be used to free us. But are there small gains that can be gotten? And in the situation that we're in, do we need small gains? Of course we do. But as we try to ply and win small games, i.e., whether or not that's voting, mutual aid, survival programs, creating our own schools and institutions, we have to do exactly what this brother said, is decouple ourselves from the American ethos of what it means to be a striving and surviving human being on the planet. We need to understand that we need to protect ourselves, that we need to rally ourselves, we need to create new institutions, we need to share resources, we need to organize with people across the planet, we need to organize with friends, family, but we have to create the organization and or organizations that allow us to speak with a unified, radical voice that does not get duped by liberal toys or prizes,
right?
That sink us back into the Democratic Party or back into their system. And so when we start to really sit down and do political education and separate ourselves from that, and again, start to create those organizations, those apparatuses, those institutions, start to create liberated territory, we have to be prepared to defend it and to fight and to let people know that this is not the same struggle that the Democratic Party is telling us to have. So we need to get on the ground and do that kind of work. And it's on us. It's on those of us who have those radical ideas, as hard as it is. And I agree, it's a hard thing to do because there are so many opportunities for America to seep itself into our community and to make promises to us, to hold up a Horatio Alger story of one made it, so all of you can make it, to give us back our culture in a way that bastardizes it, but makes money off of it. There are so many ways in which they hold us back by murdering us, our people, our leaders, by imprisoning our young people, by feeding drugs into our community. So it is no easy struggle, but it is an ongoing struggle because to submit to it is death. And so we cannot submit to the oppression that we face because to submit to it is death. And we as a people have lived long enough, not only on this planet, but in this condition, that we know we are not a people who are willing to die at the hands of our oppression, that we are here to struggle against that oppression and to create new worlds, new systems, new economies, new values, to bring back things that our ancestors that make sense, but to also create new things that young people bring to us. We have the power, the strength, the vitality to do it, and we need to get it done.
Ashe.
Thank you. Hey, I appreciate the sound effect because I ain't got all of that over here. Man, this has been great, man. I think this is probably even better than the first because I feel like we're talking about like a lot of the things that's like, you know, Omowale, like you said, that are currently being brought online, that are online. You dropped transhumanism. I feel like, I would love to hear more revolutionary people like really engage what's happening around all of this AI, robots, all of these things, and the death that's gonna come. Like, I don't think it's gonna be 20 or 30 years. I think it's gonna be within 10 years, that we'll start to see a lot of this calamity, that's been brought up in this discussion. And I hope that people will listen to this and start to get serious. I know, like, I and my own family are starting to get serious. Hey, about what, like you said, canning, like gardening, like all of that stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, I remember John Henry Clark saying, like, we don't clothe ourselves, we don't feed ourselves, like we don't do none of it. And that's got to change if we're going to survive. So love and appreciation to both of you. Again, I appreciate all that you all are doing in terms of organizing in your own cities and across the country. And y'all are always, welcome back here anytime.
Appreciate you, sis.
Appreciate Absolutely. You too. Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thanks so much. If y'all new here, there's a lot of people in the chat. Make sure y'all subscribe to this channel. Make sure y'all like this video and make sure you share it. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Peace.
Peace.